before Walmart, before Amazon. There was Main Street, where every handshake meant something, and the butcher knew your name. Shopping wasn't about convenience. It was about connection. What happened to that world? In towns across America, Main Street was more than a strip of stores. It was the heart of the community, the place where life gathered in simple, familiar rhythms. Each storefront carried more than goods. It carried the stories of the families who owned them and the people who walked through the doors. The butcher sliced meat while sharing neighborhood news. The barber spun his chair, scissors clicking as he listened to stories passed from one generation to the next. The five and dime sold everything from penny candy to school supplies, and children pressed their faces against glass counters, spending nickels saved from chores. It wasn't just about what people bought. It was about who they saw. Shoppers didn't walk into nameless spaces, they stepped into relationships. The shopkeeper knew a family's favorite bread. The tailor remembered who wore which suit, and the grocer extended credit because he trusted you would settle the bill on Friday. Tabs were scribbled in pencil on lined paper, and a handshake sealed the deal. It was a system built on trust, one that worked because people belonged to one another as much as they belonged to the town. Children often carried coins or a written list tucked in their small hands, sent to fetch milk or bread on their own. They were greeted by name, sometimes slipping an extra peppermint into their pocket on the way out. These errands taught more than responsibility. They reinforced a child's place in the community. Adults watched from porches, neighbors greeted one another on sidewalks, and the sound of a jingling doorbell was as familiar as the toll of the church bell on Sunday morning. For many, the sensory memories remain etched in the mind. The smell of leather in the cobbler shop, the squeak of wooden floors at the general store, the rustle of paper bags folded with care. Shopping was never rushed. It was part of the day, woven into the rhythm of small-town life. People lingered, they talked, they laughed. They weren't customers so much as neighbors. This was America before convenience redefined the landscape. Main Street meant more than commerce, it meant identity. Families measured time not by sales or promotions, but by the rhythm of seasons, the festivals that brought towns together, and the gatherings that started with a simple stop at the corner store. Belonging wasn't sold. It was lived. But time doesn't stand still, and neither did America's way of shopping. It started small, bigger stores, bigger parking lots. At first, it was exciting, but it would change everything. In the 1960s and 70s, America was shifting. Suburbs were spreading outward. Cars were no longer luxuries, but necessities. And families wanted shopping that fit their new pace of life. Supermarkets began to appear, offering rows of goods under one roof. Shoppers no longer needed to visit the butcher for meat, the baker for bread, and the grocer for canned goods. Instead, they could roll a cart down polished aisles and check off everything on their list in one trip. For many families, this was revolutionary. Mothers could drive to the edge of town, park right outside, and fill the trunk with a week's worth of groceries. Fathers, often pressed for time after work, appreciated the efficiency. Children loved the wide aisles filled with colorful packaging and cereal boxes with prizes inside. The supermarket felt like progress, and in many ways, it was. But progress always has a cost. As more of these larger stores appeared, downtown streets grew quieter. People who once strolled from shop to shop now loaded their carts in fluorescent-lit spaces. The jingling bells on Main Street doors gave way to the squeak of shopping cart wheels and the hum of cash registers. The faces once tied to family businesses faded, replaced by clerks who rotated shifts and managers hired from outside the community. The convenience was undeniable. Parking lots offered room for every car, something cramped Main Streets couldn't match. The prices were lower too, as chains used bulk purchasing to undercut local competition. For a family watching every dollar, the choice seemed obvious. Why spend more for the same goods? Variety also played its part. Instead of one kind of flour, there were 5. Instead of one kind of jam, a dozen lined the shelves. Choice became the new measure of value. Yet beneath the surface, something was changing. Shopping was no longer a social act, but a private errand. Neighbors didn't linger at counters, chatting with clerks who knew their names. Instead, they hurried through aisles, pushing carts toward checkout lines, eyes down, minds focused on efficiency. What was once a cultural heartbeat was slowly becoming a transaction. The shift felt gradual, almost invisible, but it spread across the country. In town after town, people were pulled toward the lure of bigger stores and bigger savings. Main Street wasn't dead yet, but the foundations were starting to crack. But before the giants claimed the edge of town, they quietly set up shop on Main Street itself. Woolworths had grilled cheese. Jackpenny had creaky floors. Even the chains once felt like home. In towns across America, the arrival of national chains didn't immediately feel like an invasion. At first, they blended seamlessly into the rhythm of Main Street. Sears, Jackpenny, and Woolworth opened doors that looked much like the local shops around them, brick storefronts with hand-painted signs, narrow aisles that creaked under wooden floors, and counters where employees greeted neighbors by name. For families, these stores offered something new without stripping away what felt familiar. Woolworths was more than a store. It was an experience. Its lunch counters became meeting places, serving grilled cheese, pie, and milkshakes to shoppers who stopped for a rest. Kids slid onto stools, swinging their legs as they shared ice cream sundaes, while parents lingered over cups of coffee. It was commerce and community wrapped into one. Jackpenny carried a different kind of nostalgia. The store's catalog pickup desk was often the busiest spot in town, where people came to collect parcels ordered from the famous Big Book. Neighbors would compare purchases, flip through catalog pages together, and dream about the next season's fashions or home appliances. For small-town families, these moments felt like a bridge between the familiar and the modern. Sears offered tools, clothing, and household items that seemed to connect every household to a wider world. Yet even here, the store felt personal. Managers often lived in the same town. Employees were neighbors and classmates, and the sense of belonging that marked Main Street shops remained intact. These national names became part of memory. Parents brought children to pick out Sunday clothes. Couples bought rings and appliances to start married life, and teenagers found their first jobs behind the counters. Unlike the massive stores that would come later, these early chains carried a sense of human warmth. A shopper might find a familiar face behind the counter, and a purchase was often accompanied by conversation. What made these chains feel different was the way they wove themselves into local culture. They didn't demand that Main Street change for them. Instead, they adapted, keeping smaller layouts, using local architecture, and hiring people who already belonged to the community. The result was a shopping experience that carried the reliability of a big brand but retained the heart of a small town. Families created memories within their walls. A child's first school shoes, a prom dress chosen from a rack, or a record bought from the corner stand. These were milestones that stayed in people's minds. Shopping wasn't only about the item. It was about the moment. But it wasn't long before these beloved names followed the money and the cars. The superstores didn't just sell more, they redefined what shopping meant in America. By the 1980s and 90s, the quiet arrival of chains on Main Street had given way to something far larger. Shopping was no longer confined to downtown blocks. Instead, it sprawled into vast parking lots and enclosed malls. These spaces promised everything under one roof fashion: food courts, electronics, shoes, toys, even entertainment. For many families, weekends now meant piling into the car and driving to the mall, where hours slipped by in a world of escalators, skylights, and endless aisles. Malls and shopping centers sprang up across the country, and their appeal was immediate. They offered shelter from weather, safety for children to roam, and the thrill of variety. But what made them powerful was their sameness. A mall in Ohio looked much like one in California. The stores inside the Gap, Foot Locker, Radio Shack were identical in layout and design, a predictable experience no matter where you lived. This uniformity became the new comfort, replacing the quirky individuality of old main streets. The motto was clear: bigger, faster, cheaper. Consumers valued convenience above all else. A shopper could walk into a store, find the exact same sweater in multiple sizes and colors, and buy it at a price smaller shops couldn't match. Bargain hunting became part of the culture. Entire families spent afternoons roaming fluorescent-lit aisles, filling carts in bulk, their choices guided by low prices and flashy sales. Architecture followed this logic. Instead of brick facades and squeaky wooden floors, malls and big-box stores used concrete, steel, and wide-open layouts designed for speed. Parking lots stretched for acres, with glowing signs towering above highways. The efficiency was undeniable, but it stripped away charm. Shopping became an impersonal loop of entry, purchase, and exit. Yet beneath the excitement, something was quietly disappearing. The rituals of connection, knowing the shopkeeper, chatting with neighbors, feeling rooted in a place faded. Transactions replaced relationships. Shoppers didn't linger to talk. They hurried to buy. The heart of community life was being buried under the appeal of more. And still, for many, the loss wasn't immediately felt. After all, who could resist the bright lights, the variety, the low prices? Children grew up with birthday parties at the mall arcade. Teenagers wandered food courts, their first taste of independence. Parents loaded carts at Walmart or Target, grateful for the savings. The culture of shopping had transformed into something vast, efficient, and without many noticing, less human. And once the giants left, Main Street began to fade store by store, window by window. The barber closed. The bell on the door stopped ringing. And just like that, Main Street went quiet. What had once been the center of daily life began to hollow out. Small businesses, unable to compete with the low prices and massive inventories of the big box stores, shut their doors one by one. Some owners retired quietly, selling off what little they had left. Others filed for bankruptcy, their dreams reduced to for-lease signs taped in dusty windows. The empty storefronts told a story without words, a story of change that felt irreversible. For children who grew up in these towns, the losses were deeply personal. The candy store that had given out free lollipops was gone. The toy shop where birthdays were celebrated closed its doors. Even the shoe store, where a clerk once measured growing feet with a metal ruler, disappeared. These weren't just businesses, they were landmarks of memory, erased from the landscape. The rhythm of the community changed. Where neighbors once met by chance at the butcher counter or shared conversations at the diner, there were now fewer reasons to linger. Without those daily points of connection, people drifted into their cars, driving to malls on the outskirts of town or later, shopping without leaving their homes at all. The casual ties that held communities together loosened. The toll was more than economic. It was emotional. Walking down Main Street, once alive with the scent of fresh bread and the chatter of familiar voices, now carried a heavy silence. Storefronts sat dark, paint peeled from doorframes, and weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalk. What had once been the heartbeat of a town now felt like a ghost of its former self. Nostalgia lingered, but it carried pain. Residents looked back with longing, remembering the feeling of belonging, the comfort of being recognized and greeted, the joy of small-town rituals. They missed the creak of floors beneath their shoes, the jingling bells above the door, the sense that shopping was woven into the fabric of daily life rather than reduced to a task. The loss wasn't just about where they bought things, it was about losing the rhythm of connection. In many places, the collapse of Main Street mirrored the collapse of community itself. The spaces that had once drawn people together now pushed them apart. What was lost couldn't easily be measured in dollars, but in the absence of familiarity, trust, and togetherness. But it wasn't just stores we lost, it was something deeper. We gained speed, but lost our stories. Was it really worth it? As America embraced the new world of shopping, the change was obvious. What once began as conversations across counters turned into quick transactions at checkout lanes. Where clerks once knew names, families, and favorite items, now they scanned barcodes with barely a glance. Customer service, once rooted in relationships, gave way to self-service. Shoppers loaded carts, moved down conveyor belts, and left with bags in hand, often without speaking more than a few words. At first, the efficiency felt liberating. A week's worth of food could be bought in less than an hour. No waiting for deliveries, no stopping at multiple stores, no long talks that slowed the day. But as speed became the priority, something human was lost. The warmth of connection, the sense of being recognized and valued, faded. Shopping no longer felt like a shared ritual, it became a task to be completed. This new pace also carried with it an undercurrent of loneliness. The grocery aisles were full, but they felt strangely empty. Neighbors no longer lingered to exchange stories. Children no longer received a smile and a piece of candy from the shopkeeper. Instead, families rushed past one another, each in pursuit of efficiency. The community bonds that had once been strengthened through daily interactions grew weaker. Old rituals disappeared quietly. The grocer who wrapped packages in brown paper, the baker who set aside your usual loaf, the tailor who asked about your children, all of them were replaced by rows of shelves and uniform store policies. In their place came the anonymity of modern retail. You could shop in any city, in any state, and find the exact same experience. That sameness was powerful, but it erased the distinct flavor of local life. The cultural trade-off was clear. America gained the ability to buy more, faster, and cheaper. But it came at the cost of soul. Shopping became stripped of its human dimension. The stories once tied to purchases the memory of who sold it, the place it came from, the trust that carried it were gone. What remained was convenience, but not connection. For many, it took years to recognize the depth of what had changed. By then, the silence on Main Street was unmistakable. Progress had given efficiency, but it had also left behind emptiness. The question lingered. Was speed worth the sacrifice of story? And just when Main Street thought it couldn't get worse, something even bigger arrived. Then came Amazon, and the store in your town became a website. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, shopping entered a new frontier. With the click of a mouse, the world of commerce moved into living rooms. Suddenly, a family didn't have to drive to the mall or push a cart down aisles. They could sit at a desk, type in a search bar, and within days or even hours have what they wanted at the doorstep. The revolution wasn't slow. It was immediate, and it was everywhere. Legacy stores that had once seemed unshakable crumbled under the weight of this digital avalanche. Sears, once the proud backbone of American retail, closed store after store. Jackpenny, long a fixture of middle-class life, struggled to survive. Even chains that had thrived in the mall era found themselves losing ground as more people turned to online shopping. The old giants weren't just competing with each other. Anymore, they were competing with a screen that never closed. What made e-commerce unstoppable was its promise of availability. Amazon was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It didn't matter if it was midnight or a holiday, you could buy anything you needed. Shopping no longer depended on hours of operation or distance. It became a constant, accessible part of daily life. The word normal changed forever. Home delivery overtook browsing aisles. The sound of a jingling bell above a shop door was replaced by the thud of a package on the porch. Families grew used to cardboard boxes stacked at the doorstep, sealed with the familiar Smile logo. The experience of shopping, once tangible and sensory, shrank to a series of clicks, tracking numbers, and email confirmations. The loss went beyond physical stores. Local shops, already struggling to survive against big box chains, were sidelined completely. Their personal service, their unique products, their human touch, none of it could compete with the speed, scale, and reach of the internet. A local bookstore couldn't match 2-day shipping. A neighborhood shoe store couldn't stock every style in every size. For many, the shift wasn't a choice. It was inevitability. What had once been about walking through town, greeting neighbors, and making purchases tied to memory had turned into a solitary experience behind a screen. The marketplace, once alive with faces and voices, became digital silence. But just as it all seemed lost, something surprising began to happen. A new generation is discovering the charm of old storefronts and breathing life into the past. In towns where Main Street once stood silent, a quiet revival began to take shape. Brick buildings that had sat empty for decades were polished, restored, and given new life. Downtown revitalization projects, often led by local leaders or small community groups, poured energy into saving what remained. Fresh paint covered weathered facades, cracked sidewalks were repaired, and neon signs flickered back to life. What once seemed lost forever found a second chance. Farmers markets began popping up, drawing crowds on Saturday mornings. People wandered through stalls piled with fresh produce, homemade jams, and handcrafted goods. The experience felt personal, alive with the rhythm of voices, laughter, and music. Antique shops filled old storefronts, offering treasures that carried stories of the past. Artisan bakeries, coffee roasters, and handmade craft stores took root where department stores had once dominated. These new spaces carried the same spirit of connection that had defined the old Main Street, but with a modern twist. Historic preservation became more than a cause, it became an act of pride. Towns realized that their old theaters, courthouses, and storefronts weren't just buildings. They were anchors of identity. Saving them meant saving a piece of who they were. Across the country, volunteers and local business owners worked side by side to breathe energy back into streets that had been quiet for too long. At the same time, cultural movements like Shop Small and Buy Local began to grow. Shoppers started to understand that every purchase was a choice, not only about what they bought, but about who they supported. Buying from a neighbor, even if it cost a little more, meant keeping money in the community. It meant supporting dreams, not just transactions. The choice to walk downtown instead of ordering online carried with it a sense of purpose. Community pride was reborn. Festivals returned to town squares. Holiday parades wound down Main Street once again. Families gathered for movie nights in old theaters, restored to their original glory. The nostalgia wasn't just about remembering the past. It was about recreating a rhythm of life that felt authentic, human, and deeply connected. The emotional draw of nostalgia proved powerful. For younger generations, it wasn't about longing for something they remembered. It was about discovering something they had been missing. For older generations, it was the comfort of seeing a world they thought was gone come back to life, even if only in part. Together, these groups helped create a new version of Main Street that honored the past while adapting to the present. Because no matter how much changes, one truth still holds. Main Street isn't just a place, it's a feeling. And in some towns, it's coming back to life. For all the changes America has weathered, the rise of superstores, the flood of online shopping, the quiet closing of familiar doors, something about Main Street has never truly disappeared. It lives in memory, in photographs tucked into old albums, in the way people smile when they recall the sound of a shop bell or the smell of fresh bread drifting onto sidewalks. Main Street remains the heart of America, even when the buildings sit empty, because its real power was never in the shops themselves. It was in the community they held together. Shopping has always been about more than the exchange of goods. It has been about belonging. In the simple act of buying milk or candy, people found connection, trust, and a sense of place. Main Street gave America a rhythm of life built on recognition and relationship values that cannot be measured in dollars or in speed. Even now, when modern life often prizes convenience over community, those values still matter. The balance has always been between freedom and connection. The freedom to choose the faster, cheaper option has defined progress. But the connection of slowing down, greeting a neighbor, and being known by name has defined what it means to belong. Nostalgia reminds us of that balance. It isn't about rejecting change. It's about remembering the human heart inside it. And in many towns, nostalgia has become a force for rebuilding. People are rediscovering what their parents and grandparents once knew, that a street lined with familiar doors is more than commerce, it's culture. New life flows into historic theaters, small bakeries, and farmers markets, not just because they sell something, but because they make people feel rooted again. The memory of what was lost inspires a desire to hold on to what can be saved. The legacy of shopping in America is not only the story of what we bought, but of how we lived. The errands, the laughter, the greetings across counters, these were the shared stories that shaped generations. And as long as people long for connection, Main Street, in some form, will always find a way back. Because Main Street never really left. It has always been a part of America's identity, waiting for each generation to rediscover it. Which Main Street memory do you miss most? Share it in the comments below.